Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel, Stamp Cat Stamps, where I share with you the things that I learned from my stamp collection. So the topic for today's video was actually inspired by one of you, my viewers. Hi viewer! This viewer sent me a message on my Instagram account asking if I had any stamps from Bangladesh that I could feature in a video. At the time, my answer was no. So I decided I'd better go buy some. And then things got a little bit out of control. So now I actually have quite a few Bangladesh stamps and a lot for us to talk about. Before I show you the stamps, we must delve into the history of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a relatively new country. They only just achieved independence in 1971. Some time ago, between 1858 to 1947, this area was all part of a region called the British Raj, which included modern-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I don't fully understand the governing system with the British Raj. India was not technically a colony, but they did share the same monarch. Britain seemed to have control over India through a governor general, also called the viceroy, who represented the sovereign and had control over the civil and military government. After World War II though, Britain kind of ran out of money and there were a lot of calls for independence, so the British Raj was dissolved. New borders were hastily drawn in 5 months, creating two separate Dominion states, the Dominion of India and the Dominion of Pakistan. And the Dominion of Pakistan was all one country but geographically divided into two parts, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. And these two countries were primarily divided based on religion. So India was primarily Hindu religion and Pakistan was Muslim. However, just because the people of Pakistan shared a religion, they were still very different in a lot of ways. One such difference was language, and this brings me to the first stamp that I want to show you. In 1947, the Pakistani government, who was ruling from West Pakistan, declared that Urdu should be the sole state language of Pakistan, to be used in schools, in media, and in all state documents. However, in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, the majority of people actually spoke Bengali. Protests arose, and several students at the University of Dhaka rallied to demand that Bengali be made a second state language. The protests unfortunately turned violent. The Pakistani police opened fire on the protesting students and several were wounded and some were killed. In the end, the movement was successful and Bengali was instituted as a second official state language. February 21st is now a public holiday in Bangladesh called Language Martyrs Day. And some years later, UNESCO also declared it as International Mother Language Day. To commemorate the students who lost their lives, a memorial was built at the University of Dhaka called the Shaheed Minar, which is beautifully decorated on the anniversary of the protests. This monument is also featured on some of my stamps. In fact, when I was looking at the Bangladesh stamps, there were quite a few that had this monument, at least 12 that I counted. It's definitely a symbol of national pride for them in standing up for their way of life. This green one here was actually one of Bangladesh's first stamps, issued in 1972, within 1 year of when they became an independent country. The other stamps that I bought with the Shaheed Minar Memorial are a Seatonant, issued in February 21st, 1987 for the 35th anniversary of the language movement. And as you can see, Bangladesh is not shy about showing a little bit of blood on their stamps. In addition to the conflict of the language movement, there were several other reasons why East and West Pakistan did not get along. For one thing, the government in West Pakistan focused most of their country's money on, well, West Pakistan. Any products sold by East Pakistan to other countries would be paid for to the government in West Pakistan, and they would largely keep that money and invest it in infrastructure in the West. East Pakistan also had a much more diverse population and was considered to be more secular than the West. There was a huge cyclone in 1970, the Bhola Cyclone, which smashed into East Pakistan. And the government from the West did not really do a whole lot of relief operations, or at least they've been criticized for their lack of response. 1 month later, elections were held for the National Assembly of the Government of Pakistan. The Bangladesh Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, won by a landslide, taking 167 out of 169 seats in the government. But the president at the time, Yahya Khan, did not not want a party from East Pakistan to be the majority in the government. So he refused to inaugurate the winning party and tried to delay finalizing the results. This was the tipping point for Bangladesh. Rioting ensued and sympathizers of West Pakistan were killed by Bengali mobs. And in response, West Pakistan launched something called Operation Searchlight, which was a military invasion that resulted in the systematic killing of Bengali citizens who wanted independence. While the death toll rates are uncertain, Time magazine estimated that 60,000 people were killed within 24 hours. The total amount of deaths is not officially known, but is estimated to be between 300,000 and 3 million people. In the next phase of the history, I want to mention some people who were really important in the liberation war of Bangladesh. The first of which is a man named Anthony Mascarenhas, who was a journalist actually from West Pakistan, and he was in pretty good standing with the government. He and 7 other journalists were taken over to East Pakistan after the events of Operation Searchlight and kind of told to write a news story about how well the government was dealing with these freedom fighters. But when Anthony returned home, he was very upset and completely disturbed and distraught by what he had seen. He told his wife if he could not write the story of what he'd actually seen, he would never be able to write another story for the rest of his life. This was a big deal. If he published the story, he and his family would be put in prison or even shot. So for him to share the truth of what he had seen would involve their entire family having to escape their home and never return there again. So they devised an elaborate escape plan to leave the country. Under the ruse of visiting a sick sister in London, he traveled there and visited the Sunday Times and explained what he had seen and the story that he wanted to write. They agreed to wait to publish the story until his family was safe. He called his wife and instructed her and their children to leave the country, so they flew to Britain as well. In order to make things not seem suspicious, he had to fly back to West Pakistan and then secretly sneak out at a land border, which he did via Afghanistan. As soon as he sent word that he was out, they published the story the next day, which brought the truth to light and shocked the entire world. A few other key players in this story who were particularly moved by what they heard were British MPP John Stonehouse and graphic artist and teacher Biman Chand Mullick, who is from West Bengal. Mullick had also just won an award for designing the Gandhi stamp, which also set British postal history by being the first stamp to commemorate an overseas leader and also the first stamp designed by an overseas artist. He had seen the expository news stories and his heart went out to the people suffering from the genocide there. So when John Stonehouse, who was the former Postmaster General, asked him if he'd be willing to design a set of stamps to promote their cause for independence, he immediately answered yes without hesitation and designed 8 stamps for free. And here is where, if you watch Exploring Stamps, which I know you do, you're about to see something familiar, but different. Here's a stamp I found that was just released in 2020 showing Mullick's designs for the first ever stamps of Bangladesh. But here we see him in the stamp as well, presenting his designs to John Stonehouse, and also present is Justice Abu Saeed Chaudhry, who at the time was a liaison for the forming Bangladesh government and eventually became a president of Bangladesh. I love this stamp because it's a stamp-on stamp and it also shows some of the actual faces behind the liberation movement. Also, this stamp is a little bit controversial. I only read this on one blog online, but it was saying that this stamp was actually withdrawn because the MPP John Stonehouse was actually a little bit of a controversial character. Turns out he was actually spying for Czechoslovakia the whole time. He faked his death and tried to run away to Australia, but then he got caught and taken back to Britain and was sentenced to 7 years in prison for crimes including fraud, theft, and forgery. So he's maybe not the best of role models to commemorate on a stamp, but you can't deny that whatever his intentions were, he did play a significant role in getting these first ever stamps of Bangladesh issued and printed. We'll leave it at that. What I also think is so interesting about these stamps is they have the real Cinderella story. So as you probably know, a Cinderella is a label that looks like a stamp, but it's not actually valid for postal use. And because Bangladesh was technically not a liberated country yet, you couldn't actually send any mail with these stamps. Their only purpose was for collectors who wanted to support the cause. But then, as we know, Bangladesh was liberated and they became considered real stamps. Just like how Cinderella became a real princess, these Cinderellas became actual stamps. These stamps were overprinted Bangladesh Liberated, and I bought a cover of them. item was strictly a philatelic item. These stamps and overprints were printed in Great Britain and then distributed elsewhere for collectors to buy. But valid postage or not, I still really like what the cover represents. The Liberation War ended on December 16th, 1971, and so the cancel on this cover is actually 4 days after Bangladesh officially became Bangladesh. So that's the story of Bangladesh liberation. Let me just show you the rest of the Bangladesh stamps that I bought and then you can go. Most of these are actually stamp-on stamps, which is a type of topical collection, and that's actually what my dad collects, so I'm planning to gift most of these to him on Father's Day. But I just want to point out that I really like how well they fit together. There's a lot of recurring themes here within the different sets. We have Sir Rowland Hill, who invented the first stamp-based postal system with the iconic penny black, and then juxtaposed with Bangladesh's first stamp. And then here on these stamps, we keep seeing the same figure, and it's also on the logo for the Bangla Post. This is a mail runner, which are people who literally ran sacks of mail from place to place in early India, especially remote places that didn't have good access to roads. This started well before the time of the first postage stamp in the early 1700s. It was a very tough job. They ran through all kinds of weather conditions and rough terrain all by themselves and were vulnerable to attack by wild animals or bandits. They were obsessed with delivering mail on time and would run round the clock, passing off the mail bags to other runners. They would carry a single spear with a lantern to light at night for visibility and to ward off wild animals, and often the spear would have bells on it as well. They were also used to deliver important intelligence information between rulers in different areas, which is part of why they were so obsessed with delivering the mail and information quickly. There was actually a movie released in 2015 about a mail runner set in 1854, but it's in Tamil. Otatu Duvan. Otatu Uduvan. So if you speak Tamil, you can give it a watch and let me know how it is. The other recurring symbol on these stamps is a dove with an envelope in its mouth, and this is the symbol for the Asian Oceanic Postal Union to promote easier postal exchange and communication between its member countries, of which Bangladesh is a part of. And then finally, let's get it. I bought this souvenir sheet for the Silver Jubilee of the Queen, just because I think it's so pretty. The Queen looks so beautiful in these pictures, and I really like the designs that go around the sheet as well. I think it's very beautiful, so I just bought it. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about the stamps of Bangladesh with me. As always, stay safe and stay curious. Bye!